Here we see Mary and Christian Jensen. They lived in Kerteminde, a quaint little town on the island of Funen in Denmark, here in the second half of the 1800s. Christian is a sturdy man in his mid-30s, with a thick beard and hands hardened from years of labor. Mary, slightly younger, has a gentle demeanor, with kind eyes and a face that bore the marks of rural life. They're living a modest life with their 2 small children, and they're working in farming and small-scale trade. And even though they both work long hours, it's hard to make ends meet. Denmark is going through tough times. Poor harvests, high taxes, and political changes were pushing many to consider immigration. Christian and Mary often spent evenings discussing their future, torn between staying in their homeland and seeking better opportunities abroad. One fateful night, after another grueling day in the fields, Mary has tucked the kids, and Christian is sitting with his pipe in front of the fireplace. She sits down beside him, and he says, "Mary, we need to find a better life for us and for the children." Mary nods, but at the same time her heart is heavy with the weight of leaving her family behind and setting out on a journey into the unknown. Christian and Mary Jensen were among many Danes that moved to America in the late 1800s. Their journey is a tale of resilience and hope for a better life in the land of milk and honey.
I'm driving in some landscape that looks like it could have been in Denmark. Open fields, we're in the countryside, but this is not Denmark, even though it looks so familiar. I'm in Iowa. I just left the interstate. This morning I was close to Chicago, and I've been driving through Des Moines as well, and even further out into the countryside here in Iowa. And already now I've seen quite a few signs, one saying Danish Museum, and here's another one with a Danish flag in the background saying Danish Windmill, 4 miles. I'm heading to a place called Elk Horn, and this is a little part of Denmark in the U.S.
They call this little town of 650 people Dane Country, and even though it's a small town, it's the largest rural Danish settlement in the U.S. I intend to spend a few days here to find out just how Danish it is. I'll speak to locals and explore how much of the Danish heritage still lives on today. I'll go to the Danish Windmill, that's an actual old windmill from Denmark, visit the Danish Museum called Bedstemors Hus, Grandma's House, and I'll have a few beers with Mayor Stan Jens in his garage next to his Harley Davidson. Yeah, they call it Dane Country, and sure, I'm Danish, so this specific part of American immigration history is of extra interest to me and other Danes, but stay with me. Don't feel left out if you're not Danish. I could do a similar story about a Polish-American, a Greek-American, a Korean-American community, a Chinatown, Little Italy, or, yeah, well, you insert which country you're from, or if you're American, where your ancestors were from. I'm sure you'll still find this quite interesting. My name is Palle Bo, and this is the Radio Vagabond. Welcome to Elk Horn, Iowa.
Meet Palle Bo, a full-time traveler and digital nomad from Denmark on an epic journey around the world. This is the Radio Vagabond.
This episode is supported by Hotels25.com. As you know, it's a website that helps you find the best deals on a place to stay. But now you can also search flights. Just go to Hotels25.com and have a look.
In a town called Kerteminde, on the foot shore, live Kirsten and Mary, dreams for something more. They worked the land with kids, but times were tough. Dreaming of a new life, they had enough. One night by the fire, Christian sighed, we need a better life for the kids and you and I. Mary nodded gently, fear in her heart. The promise of a new start kept them from falling apart. Oh, we're bound for the new land where the skies are blue, leaving behind hard times for a dream come true. We'll cross the wide ocean, hoping our hearts so strong to build a life together where we belong.
Back to the young couple in Denmark in 1867 and the story about Mary and Christian. Just to be clear, this is a story only based on a true story and something I made up, but it could be 100% real. Okay, let's roll the radio film again. Let's turn it back to black and white. To afford the journey, they sell most of their belongings and save every bit of money they could. Friends and family in Denmark, although supportive, are heartbroken. Even Christian's brother tries to talk him out of the idea, saying, "Think of the risk, brother. Think of the unknown." But Christian's determination is firm. The promise of fertile land and freedom in America is too strong to ignore. And in the early spring of 1868, the Jensens make their way to the port of Copenhagen. The departure is bittersweet, filled with tearful goodbyes and the hope of reunion in a better place.
Morning. Let's been down and have coffee, and I'm just... A little bit of rain, not too much.
No, not enough. It makes me feel even more like in Denmark.
It's my first morning in Elk Horn, Iowa, and it started raining, making it resemble Denmark even more. I'm staying at a wonderful B&B with Lynn and Trudy Juelsgaard on Union Street in Elk Horn. This bed and breakfast is called Country View B&B, and it offers a private apartment in the lower floor of their house with a living room, kitchen, bathroom, 2 separate bedrooms, along with a great view of the countryside from the private backyard. As I go upstairs for breakfast, Trudy is already in the kitchen making a very special Elk Horn breakfast.
Trudy, what are you making here?
I put the microphone in front of Trudy's face and she gets a little surprised and straightens her hair.
You don't need to do your hair. It's radio. No, I'm in Elk Horn, and I stay here with the Juelsgaards, or as we would say, Juelsgaard. And Trudy, you told me that you would make me some very unique breakfast this morning.
I'm using the Tivoli Fest recipe for æbleskiver and going to make them for Pella.
Okay. And you told me that this is a very old æbleskiver pan.
It's my husband, who is 73. It would be his grandmother's pan. We've estimated it to be at least 125 years old.
Yeah. And then there might be some people listening that are not Danish that have no clue what æbleskiver is. So can you help me explain the kind of round, doughy stuff?
It's a pancake dough made a little different, where you beat the egg whites and make them fluffy and stir them in, and that's what makes them fluffy. And then you put it in a special heavy pan with quite a bit of oil in it. Yeah. And as they fry, that you turn them and they become like a big golf ball or small tennis ball size.
Yeah. So the pan got 7 holes in there, and right now the oil is heating, and then you're going to put in the dough, and right. But you know what? I remember my mom had one like that, but it's rare that we have them in Denmark.
Really?
Yeah, because we just buy them in a plastic bag and heat them in the oven.
Yeah,
and they're actually pretty good.
Yeah, I guess we do it the hard way here.
Yeah.
Very well known in our community.
Yeah.
Very well known.
Yeah.
The trick of making them, just so you know, is to get them cooked through so that there isn't pudding or the doughy in the middle.
Yeah. So that it requires a special heat, not too hot, not too cold.
Exactly. That's what I have a brand new stove that I've never cooked æbleskiver on that I'm experimenting with Pella today. So we're hoping.
Be exciting.
I did make a pan for my husband already, so I think I can do it.
So and were they okay?
Yeah, they're fine. She did a good job.
Okay. Do you do æbleskiver?
No, I just eat them.
That's your job.
Yeah.
On a ship to New York through stormy seas, holding on to faith, dreams of what could be. Hail the silent welcome in liberty's light. Hope and fear entwined, stepping into the night. Homeward bound for the new land, where the skies are blue. Leaving behind hard times for a dream come true. We'll cross the wide ocean, hope in our hearts so strong, to build a life together where we belong.
The ship bound for New York is packed with other hopeful immigrants. The voyage across the Atlantic is long and demanding, spanning several weeks. The days blurred together with the endless rocking of the ship, the constant sound of crashing waves, and the cries of seasick passengers. Mary often held her locket, a gift from her mother for comfort. "Will we make it, Christian?" she asked one stormy night, her voice barely a whisper, after having been seasick for days. Christian, though equally filled with doubt, held her close and whispered, "We will. We'll have to believe that we will." This part of the journey tested their faith and strength, but the thought of a new life kept them going. The landing in New York is a sensory overload. The bustling port, the diverse crowds, the sheer scale of the city, even without skyscrapers, is overwhelming. The Jensens, like many other immigrants, are directed to Ellis Island, the gateway to America. This is their first stop in the New World, a place filled with hope and anxiety.
The Radio Vagabond.
Now you're putting in the dough. Looks kind of thick, the dough.
It's thickened up a little bit from when I first made it. Because it sat in the refrigerator for a while now.
Yeah,
so.
because I was late.
No. I think it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Back in the kitchen with Trudy, it's not only apple skewers that she's making. And this is where it becomes a bit weird for a Dane like me, and very Elk Horn. She's also preparing something called medisterpølse, or as they say, medisterpølse.
Amazing.
That's a special sausage that was made when we butchered beef not too long ago. So we'll see how Pella likes it.
Yeah, because that is something that's very uniquely Elk Horn, that you have apple skewer and medisterpølse.
Right.
Or, again, as we would say in Denmark, apple skewer and medisterpølse. Yeah. But you do realize that it's not something that we eat together.
I have been told that, yes. I don't know how that got started here, but it definitely did.
Yeah, because the apple skewer is something that is mostly something we eat for Christmas, in the Christmas month. And it's very sweet, and we eat them with powdered sugar and maybe some jam or something. And the medisterpølse is like this big sausage that we eat maybe with potatoes and gravy for a dinner.
Yes.
But you have it as a breakfast here.
Either. We do either.
Okay.
I've cooked it for dinner, too.
Yeah.
As we're enjoying breakfast, we talk a bit about the main tourist attraction in town, the Danish Windmill.
It's a crazy idea he got.
It's a fascinating piece of history.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat color.
This authentic Danish windmill was originally built in 1848 in the town of Nørre Snede in Denmark. It stood proudly there for over a century, grinding grain for the local community before finding a new home across the Atlantic. In the mid-1970s, a local man named Harvey Sørensen got the crazy idea to find an old windmill in Denmark and bring a piece of their heritage to their town. People first thought that he was losing his mind, but with remarkable effort, funds were raised, and in 1976 the windmill was found, carefully disassembled, shipped to Iowa, and meticulously reassembled by skilled craftsmen. More about that in a minute.
And I saw that when they were taking it apart, they were using burners, and they accidentally set fire to one of the wings.
Oh, yeah?
It burned when it was still in Denmark, and it was too high up for the fire department to be able to get it out. So one of the wings is reconstructed.
When the windmill arrived and the old, somewhat rotten wooden pieces were spread out on the ground, someone looked at it and said, "There's nothing rotten in the state of Denmark anymore. It's all here in Elk Horn."
The old joke is there was no longer anything rotten in Denmark. It was now in Elk Horn.
But they managed to put it back together, and the Danish Windmill now stands as a proud emblem of Danish heritage in the heart of the Midwest. After breakfast, I'm heading there to explore it, speak to the manager, Lisa Steen Riggs, learn more about its history, and see if it actually operates.
This is the Radio Vagabond podcast.
But let's first turn time back again, about 150 years, to Mary and Christian Jensen, who arrives to Ellis Island, a sprawling complex buzzing with activity. As they disembarked, Christian and Mary joined the masses of people funneling into the main building. They clutched their few belongings and tried to stay together in the sea of faces. The first challenge is the language barrier. Neither Christian nor Mary spoke any English. Fortunately, Ellis Island had interpreters for many languages, including Danish. The interpreter were essential in helping the Jensens understand the instructions and questions posed by the officials. The initial medical examination was a critical step. Doctors quickly inspected each immigrant for obvious signs of illness. Mary was nervous, but Christian squeezed her hand reassuringly. They passed the initial inspection and were directed to the registry room, a grand hall filled with wooden benches and a hum of countless conversations in various languages. Here they faced a series of questions from immigration officials. The interpreters were once again invaluable, translating questions about their names, places of origin, occupation, and their intentions. It was a rough process, with each answer meticulously recorded. The officials wanted to make sure that the newcomers were healthy, honest, and had the means to support themselves. The process seemed to drag on forever, but finally they received the nod of approval. They were cleared to enter the United States. A wave of relief washed over them.
You can see pictures, videos, and links and read much more on theradiovagabond.com. You can also send a few lines to Palabo and get featured on the show. Tell him where you are and what you're doing right now as you're listening to these words. Just click on Contact on theradiovagabond.com and fill out the form.
He's the radio vagabond, podcasting his way from icy peaks to tropic greens display. Every download a doorway, story key, inspiring souls to wander, to live and be free.
Welcome to Elk Horn, one of the largest rural Danish settlements in the United States, and home of our authentic 1848 Danish Windmill.
The windmill in Elk Horn is run by the Danish Windmill Corporation, a non-profit organization. It's operated by a dedicated staff and volunteers who manage the daily operations, guided tours, and maintenance of the windmill. I'm meeting Lisa Steen Riggs, the manager of the Danish Windmill, and ask her to tell me more about the story of how this came to be. As I mentioned, it was Harvey Sorensen who came up with the crazy idea. It'll bring in tourists, he said. And at that time, it was a farming community and anything but a tourist destination.
We didn't even have tourism or tourist in our vocabulary back then, because we had farmers, agricultural community, but we were kind of starting to die a little bit. The farm economy wasn't so good at the time. Some of our business were closing, but yet we were trying to keep our school going. We believe in small rural schools, very proud of our school. We were called Danes and Lady Danes. That was our mascots. So we were known all over the state, and we had good sports and everything, but we needed something else, and Harvey had the crazy idea that we should bring a windmill from Denmark, and a lot of people had visited their relatives in Denmark, and yes, they were beautiful, but They couldn't even, just the long-range planning was just kind of difficult.
Point one, are you out of your mind?
Right.
And point two, it's impossible.
Yeah, but then he talked to a few of the local people, and there was one man in particular, was Warren Jacobson, and he loved the idea. He just thought that's crazy enough. Maybe it's a way of keeping our small town from dying, and a way of honoring our Danish heritage. And also it was for the bicentennial year, 1976. So they had a fundraiser, and in 3 days they raised $30,000 in pledges to get the ball rolling, not knowing what it would cost, what it would take to bring an old windmill from Denmark, and even if it was possible.
Yeah, and also you need to find one.
Yeah, it's what they did. First, they wrote the Danish government and said, we'd like to buy a Danish windmill, which was crazy enough. And the Danish government, whoever it went to, thought it was crazy. And they said, we don't have windmills for sale. Go to Holland and get a Dutch windmill. Well, damn it. We're Danish, not Dutch, and that's a common problem here. Everybody always thinks we're Dutch.
If I had $1 for every time I heard people say, "Oh, you're from Denmark, so you speak Dutch,"
yes. Or
I even had somebody say, "Oh, I haven't really been to Denmark. I've only been to Amsterdam."
Yeah, like, oh, we like the Kinderdijk, But so we've always had to explain that. So we left the government alone. We started writing our relatives in Denmark, and this particular one relative here, Milo Anderson, wrote his cousin Harry Peterson in Esbjerg, and said, can you find us a windmill for sale? Well, he did. He took it on, and he got in the car, and he went to Norra Snida, and there a windmill stood that had not worked for 20 years. It was owned by an old newspaper man and his wife, and talked to him and said, we'd like to buy your windmill. And then they came up with $11,000 to sell it to us. Let us know back here. That's when we had our $30,000 fundraiser, and that's probably all it would take.
Yeah.
And then the local group in Norra Snida said, well, if the Americans want it, maybe it's something we should keep here in our town. So this Harry Peterson, on his own, went out on a limb saying, if you sell it to the people of Elk Horn, they'll throw in a free trip to America if you sell it to Elk Horn. And that's what sealed the deal.
Oh.
And so once the windmill did leave the country, Denmark did pass a law that no more mills leave Denmark, which we're happy for. And also it was kind of a wake-up call to Denmark that maybe we should be restoring. And I'm proud to say that Denmark has like over 100 mills open on their National Mill Day. They're doing a great job, and you have the famous Dubel Mill. You have a lot of history, but that story needs to be told. And so once the windmill came, well, I should back up. This Harry Peterson found a carpenter to do the work, and they tore it down piece by piece. Yeah, and they built a small-scale model, thank goodness, because, nobody from Elk Horn went to Denmark, and nobody from Denmark came to Elk Horn to assist each other. So once it came here, the big story was all the communities around were kind of making fun of us, that those crazy Danes in Elk Horn, Iowa, brought over a rotten windmill, and there was nothing left rotten in Denmark.
Because now it's all in Elk Horn.
Yeah. So it was almost like, okay, we got to prove to everybody. And that was a year that I was coming back and forth every week, and I was going to college, and I'd come home, and I'd look at this place, and there was all this rotten lumber all over the place. I was almost embarrassed. I think, how are they going to do it? But they had 5 main men that good common sense. One was a farmer, one was a carpenter, one owned a lumber yard, one was a mason, and one was Harvey Sorensen, who was very mechanical with machinery. And they worked out each problem every day with the help of that scale model, which was on a scale of 1 to 10. They could see where pieces should go. They didn't always know what went in first, what went in last. But then, because of national news, there's 2 Danish-American newspapers in the United States at that time. Well, there was an article in the Danske Pioneer, which is out of Chicago, We had this man, this Herman Christensen, who as a young man in Denmark went to mill builder school to be a millwright. Well, his family, he was like third generation, and his grandfather and father and oldest brother were in the business, and there really wasn't room for him. So he immigrated to New York City and became a big contract worker. But he read that these crazy Danes in Elk Horn, Iowa were bringing over an old windmill, and he thought, you know what, they need my expertise. So he came out here for 2 weeks and helped him on scaffolding and what should go in first, what should go in last. And it was a godsend to our people. But it took our people 1 year. And when I say our people, the community, it was nobody owned it. It was strictly a community project. And so they did form a nonprofit several years later, but at first they formed like a civic organization, like a chamber.
Yeah.
But that's who pretty much owned it. They have a board of directors of 7, and the rest is a membership, $10 a year.
Yeah.
Today the windmill is not just a static exhibit. It's a working windmill, complete with grinding stones and all the original mechanisms. This charming piece of Denmark attracts thousands of visitors each year, offering a glimpse into the past and a tangible connection to Danish culture and craftsmanship.
From New York to Chicago, on the train they rode. Met a couple from Viborg, shared dreams on the road. Heard of fertile land, the Homestead Act. With dreams of a new life, there was no turning back. Oh, we're bound for the new land, where the skies are blue. Leaving behind hard times, for a dream come true. We'll cross the wide ocean, hoping our hearts so strong, to build a life together where we belong.
Christian and Mary Jensen are making their way to the station called Hudson River Railroad Depot on 10th Avenue. And this is the starting point of their journey from New York. They admire the train that'll take them across the vast American landscape. Christian is mostly fascinated by this marvel of new modern technology. The train journey will be a stark contrast to the cramped quarters of the ship, offering a glimpse into the expansive Midwest. The train carries them to Chicago, where they team up with another Danish couple from Denmark, Peter and Sørine, and their young son Niels. Through letters from his uncle, who immigrated a bit earlier, Peter had heard of a place further west with fertile land, and about a new federal law called Homestead Act of 1862 that provides a nice chunk of land to settlers, totally free. They just have to promise to improve the land by building a house and cultivating crops for at least 5 years. This law is a massive draw for many immigrants, and in Chicago, Christian shakes Peter's hand and says, "We're in. We're doing this, future neighbor."
The Radio Vagabond. Gotta keep moving.
What was even more fun is that they finished it in a year's time. They finished it to working condition. It had not worked for 20 years. And it was a thing of beauty, you know, to see it in the celebrations the locals had and people that came from all over to see this crazy idea that got finished in a town of 650 residents. And so they ran it for a year with all volunteers and, people they didn't have as many hours a week. And then they decided that everybody was asking for Danish souvenirs or Danish giftware. So that's when they decided to hire a manager to do the buying. Plus, they were so far in debt, they had to get the debt paid off. Mm-hmm. So they thought they would hire somebody to run it. So that's when I came into play.
You came in, so you were the first.
Yeah, so I was 44 years ago this November, and I was actually a co-manager with another gal in the very beginning, and she went off to become a nurse and then a nurse practitioner. So the mill was far from what her life career ended up being. But I was hired and we did a lot of fundraisers. There's been times where we had enough money to redo the cap frame, And then we went through hard times because the bank had our loan, a $100,000 loan, and they were putting a lot of pressure on us here. And here it was a community project, and we had this windmill, and we had such, we feel like we were going to let the men that put the mill together and all the volunteers down by the bank taking it over. It was just terrible times. And that's kind of when the Denmark on the Prairie film came about. At our height and glory, we were getting 80,000 visitors a year, 80 motor coaches, and now we're still happy we're getting 30 motor coaches a year, and about 54,000 tourists were coming into our little tiny town.
The documentary Lisa mentions, Denmark on the Prairie, is a film from 2013 shown on national Danish TV, and it became somewhat of a hit. A year later, they did a follow-up, and later that year, a popular cooking show went there with 2 shows where they looked into the way they're doing Danish food here and showed them how to do it in the real traditional Danish way. Through these 4 shows, quite a few of the locals became famous and almost household names in Denmark, like Lisa, the mayor, Stan Jens, and many other locals. All of this has been good for tourism and donations, and it all started with the film Denmark on the Prairie. When the windmill was being put back together, Lisa was a young woman going to college and only visiting her parents once in a while. And it was not in the cards that she would end up working here as a manager.
Not at all. No, I always dreamt of getting married and moving to Colorado. And then my husband, we lived in Atlantic, 12 miles south, his hometown. And then all once there was an ad that the Danish Windmill wanted to hire somebody. And at that time, I had just started a flower shop greenhouse in a business in Atlantic. So my schooling was a community college, so I learned the basics about bookkeeping, running a business, how to market, how to advertise. It was a very good program through a community college. And so I was doing weddings, I was a florist, and I was every weekend. I had 30 weddings my first year, and this job came up, and my father, who was in the farming business, that was kind of a naysayer in the beginning, like, why do we need tourists and what do we need, and he always would apologize to me after the fact. But he said, why don't you apply for the job? And I had another man that came to me and said, you should apply for the job. We'd love to have young people move back into the community. So I did.
And was it a hard time convincing your husband?
No. He follows me wherever I go. Bless his heart. So in fact, he's outside now building a Nissa house. So it was something that I didn't know I'd be here this many years, 44 years this November. But it's been such a good community, and it's been fun because we've created festivals in that time. Our restaurants enlarged. We had bed and breakfast. Then we were able to build a motel. It's been fun to see us go from maybe a farming community to more tourism related. But yet, our population hasn't grown, but we're still very proud of our Danish heritage.
It's never been a big city. At its peak, the population was around 1,000, now only around 650. But it's a town that's very proud of its Danish heritage and has done a lot to keep the Danish traditions alive. Some of them has been Americanized and watered down over time, like the thing with æbleskiver and medisterpølse. Lisa is a third-generation immigrant, with her grandparents' story reminding me of the story of Christian and Mary.
Yeah, my grandparents immigrated from Denmark. They all came over between the age of, I think, 18. Well, the one came when she was 12 years old with her mother and 5 other siblings because the grandfather had died in Denmark, or the father had died, so they came over. They actually had a butcher shop in Ribe. And they could look at their window and see the church, the Domkirke, in the window. But they immigrated in great hardships. Once they they were sold that America, there was chickens hanging off the trees and the streets were lined in gold and
giving away free land.
Yeah. And so when they came, it was really hard times, and for both sets of grandparents, and none of them were married in Denmark. They were married over here. And, their stories through Ellis Island and then ending up in Ottoman County and Shelby County and farmers. And then they had to have sponsors to come over, so other farmers that had maybe immigrated themselves had bought land. They were able to bring in workers, you might say. Mm-hmm. So they all started. My grandmother always tells, her name was Minna, her story was that she left running water and electricity in Denmark. She came over here and didn't have it for another 25 years. So things weren't all that great. The other grandmother, Anna Katrina, she always felt she would go back. I mean, she always missed her home country. So some became very proud Americans, some were very homesick, and then to lose children, childbirth or child diabetes, a lot of sadness, but then they became such good Americans and strong Americans, but yet always remembering their heritage. Yeah. My grandparents and then my parents all in the home, the grandparents or their parents spoke Danish. Yeah. So a lot of them didn't learn English until they went to school here. And then we had the Danish folk school, the first one in America, and there was 10 such colleges after this one in Elk Horn. And that's where the farmers would go in the winter to either learn English or learn about farming practices. And then the women would go in the summer and they learned to stitch and gymnastics and all that. So that's why so many Danes settled in this area. And most of them were farmers, dairymen, carpenters, mason workers, bricklayers.
Gotta keep moving, gotta keep moving, gotta keep moving, gotta keep moving.
Christian and Mary switched from the bustling, smoke-filled trains to horse-drawn carriages. These would take them the final stretch through more rural and undeveloped areas of the Midwest. The journey is tiring, filled with long days, nights under the open sky. Despite the hardship, the sight of the vast open plains renews their hope. They feel a new sense of determination, driven by the promise of a new beginning. When they arrive in this place in Iowa, there isn't even a village. The two small families were among the first settlers to arrive here in 1868, and Christian and Mary knew that they had found their new home. The rolling hills and the fertile soil reminded them of Denmark, giving them a sense of belonging. They, along with other Danish immigrants, worked tirelessly to build their community from the ground up. It was hard work, and not only milk and honey, but Christian and Mary often stood at the edge of their new land, looking at the fields with a sense of pride.
In Iowa's hills, they built their home. With sweat, tears, and laughter, no more to roam. Christian and Mary stood proud on their land. In Elk Horn they found life hand in hand. Homeward bound for the new land, where the skies are blue. Leaving behind hard times for a dream come true. We'll cross the wide ocean, hoping our hearts so strong, to build a life together where we belong.
We'll be back with more from Elk Horn next week. My name's Palabo, and I gotta keep moving. See ya.
Produceret af Radio Guru.dk